There he is. Perfect. All right, so let's call this meeting to order. Frank or Dave, maybe, I guess, just take roll call, please.
Yes, good morning. Vice Chairperson Savidian.
Here.
Chairperson Wasserman.
Here. Thank you, Peggy. All right, now we have public comment. Peggy, do we have anybody wishing to speak about anything not on today's agenda waiting in the queue?
I have no raised hands.
Okay.
Actually, I have one raised hand. I apologize.
One raised hand. Let's put that one person on who can speak about anything not on today's agenda, and they're entitled to 3 minutes.
Our first speaker is Pamela Campos. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 3 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Can you guys hear me? Sorry, I'm just gonna pull up my, is there any way I could not see this full screen, the time, so I can also pull up my notes?
Hit your escape key.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Any way I could restart? Sorry.
Your time has restarted. Go right ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Chairperson Wasserman, Vice Chair Smidian, and fellow members of my beloved community. My name is Pamela Campos, and I work for Build Up for San Mateo County's Children, an initiative designed to grow and improve the supply of early care and education facilities, ECE facilities, in our neighboring county. Today, I advocate the importance of creating a similar initiative in our community so that Santa Clara County can continue taking the necessary actions towards addressing this severely oppressive issue. In 2019, the local Early Education Planning Council contributed to a statewide report on ECE facilities that found a supply gap in our county at roughly 50 to 75% for preschool-aged children who are income eligible for public funded care. While the supply gap for our infants and toddlers measured around 75 to 100%. Santa Clara County Office of Education published an early learning facility study where data visibly demonstrates the immense inequities in providing quality care and education to the youngest members of our community. 2,457 is the unmet need for infant and toddler care in the city of Santa Clara. 2,555 is the unmet need in Sunnyvale for this same age group, while 16,464 is the unmet need for this same population in the city of San Jose alone. As an educator who has worked in Santa Clara County for the last decade, it is my duty to inform you of the need to fund early care and early environments. During a time of economic crisis and financial instability, we must not allow children to remain voiceless in this pandemic. Children who spend anywhere from 4 to 12 hours per day in an early care and learning setting need their environments to be safe, nurturing, and high quality spaces in order to thrive. At a time when over 75% of the human brain is developing, children ages 0 to 5 depend on the adults in their lives for nearly everything, from providing nurturing care to advocating the importance of their needs and legislative decisions. Decades worth of research proves that society gains as much as $16 in long-term savings for every single dollar invested in early care and education. Early care and learning spaces are an integral piece of community infrastructure interrelated with housing and transit, yet it is a topic rarely addressed due to the lack of incentives, funding, and visibility. With distinct municipal zoning codes in each city, a scarce availability of spaces, and a limited pool of experts in the field, we must acknowledge that solutions working to address this critical shortage is rooted in collaborative efforts, not only among those in the early childhood education community, but also with support from elected government officials, planning commissions, business
Thank you very much. All right, and that concludes our public comment portion of today's agenda. And Supervisor Smidian, just prior to your getting on, since you and I had already discussed this, I explained to everybody else present that we'll be recessing at 10:50 for the 11 o'clock press conference, reconvening approximately 11:15, that item number 9 and speaking with Daphne will be heard after 4, 5, and 6. And as long as we can get it all in, because I have a hard stop at noon, we figure it will all happen. But if it doesn't, then Jasmine can have her option of our approving it under consent or putting it off to the next board meeting where she can make a presentation. With that, we'll move on to the consent calendar and Supervisor Committee. And based on what I just said, what we have on our consent right now is 7, 8, and 10. Are there any changes, additions, or subtractions you'd like to make?
No additions or deletions or changes of any sort, Mr. Chairman. And if you'd like a motion to approve the consent calendar as revised, I so move.
Thank you very much, and I'll second that. So, Dave, that passes unanimously. That moves us on.
Supervisor Wasserman, I apologize. We do need to do a roll call vote. Vice Chairperson Savannah.
Aye.
And Chairperson Wasserman.
Aye. I didn't think we did, Peggy, since he made the motion voice and I seconded voice, but I absolutely understood. Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 4, to receive a report from the Office of the County Exec, Department of Planning and Development relating to a proposed scope of work for updates to the Stanford University Community Plan. Jacqueline. Oh, I'm sorry, Peggy, just for confirmation, did we have any speakers for the 3 consent items that were approved?
We do have 2 speakers.
On the consent items?
No longer. Their hands are down.
Okay. Would you please let them know that was my mistake? I moved too quickly, and if they wish to speak, they may do so, and they'll each have up to 2 minutes.
And no hands are being raised.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we turn to item number 4, Jacqueline. I don't see Jacqueline's on my screen, but you need to unmute. Unmute, maybe the bottom left.
Yeah, she's still muted.
Yeah.
It's what you did, Jacqueline, when you did the mic check.
She did a mic check and it was working fine.
Yeah, I'm just saying that she needs to do the same thing now that she did then. I like having something named after me.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. This item is a Stanford Community Plan, a response to a referral we received. We have with us today Jeff Bradley, our consultant who is working with county staff. And so I will turn the presentation, and Sylvia Gallegos, our deputy executive. And so at this point, I will turn the presentation over to Jeff Bradley. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Anciano. I also have with me today Marianne Nictus. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit echo here. She will be controlling the PowerPoint. Good morning, Chair Wasserman and Vice Chair Simidian. I'm Jeff Bradley, Consulting Project Manager for the Stanford Community Plan Update Project.
Good morning.
Today, we'd like to introduce the community plan update, provide some background, an overview of the public process, community outreach strategy, and next steps. The project schedule for the community plan update allows for 18 to 24 months with a target end date of fall 2022. The department proposes to provide updates to the Hewlett Committee and the Planning Commission throughout this process, including discussion of the draft community plan updates. The update of the community plan is the first phase of a work plan to update the county's entire general plan. The community plan is part of the county's general plan as it applies to Stanford lands in unincorporated county, Santa Clara County. The community plan was first adopted by the board back in 2000, so it's been over 20 years now, and was most recently amended in 2015. As the graphic shows here on the screen, could we go back to that one, Marianne? It's a large area, over 4,000 acres, hard up against the San Mateo County boundary and Menlo Park and Palo Alto jurisdictions. And then we go to the next slide. The community plan includes the following 7 elements, which tracks very closely with standard general plan, the required standard general plan elements. They are growth and development, land use, housing, circulation, open space, resource conservation, and health and safety. As shown on the slide here, the red line is the academic growth boundary, which was established to promote compact urban development and the preservation of open space by focusing construction within the developed campus area and limiting development in the foothills. The area above the red line is generally the academic campus that's developed with a variety of buildings and facilities to support the university. And then to the south of the red line, towards the bottom of the page, is what's called the foothills, or the open space area that is protected by both general plan and zoning policies, and is really limited to what it can use for, such as field research and open space. While processing the Stanford's general use permit from late 2016 up until November of last year, county staff found that the community plan was really needed to be updated due to the length of time it had been since it was originally adopted. Changes to the community plan were proposed by both Stanford University and the administration and considered by the Planning Commission and the board in tandem with the proposed adoption of the new general use permit for Stanford back in the fall of last year. The general use permit application however, was withdrawn by Stanford on November 1st of 2019, and the community plan updates were subsequently not adopted by the board. However, on February 11th of this year, the board did unanimously approve this referral, recommending the administration move forward with the items related to updates to the community plan and implementation of the 1985 Land Use Policy Agreement. The Land Use Policy Agreement, in terms of background on that document, is an agreement between the county, the city of Palo Alto, and Stanford University. It was entered into back in 1985 to establish mutual policies regarding land use, annexation, development of Stanford lands, and as well as the provision of municipal services.
And Jeff, I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute.
The board referral directed the staff to address
Jeff,
the following issues within the community plan update. The first being the relocation of the possible future school site designation, which is currently on the east side of the campus.
Excuse me, Jeff.
Not very proximate to.
Can you hear?
Thank you. Jeff, can you hear me? Jeff, can you hear me?
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. If you can just break for a minute. We're going to have to break in 30 minutes. Peggy, how many speakers do you have on this item?
Apologies, we have one speaker. No, we have 3 speakers.
We have 3 speakers, right?
The number's going up. We have 5 now.
Okay,
6.
I want to make sure that we're able to hear our speakers before we have to break for the press conference, so that they don't have to be worried about tuning in and out on the Zoom. So Jeff, let's give you about 3 or 4 more minutes, and then we're going to break to the speakers. Thank you.
Okay. So as this slide shows, there was really 3 major items the board referral focused on: the relocation of the school site, the extension of the protection of the academic growth boundary from 25 years to 99 years, requiring the supermajority vote, and finally other changes as suggested by staff, including policies based on studies focused on graduate student housing affordability, municipal services, and childcare. Next slide. Table 1 of the staff report is basically this slide, listing out all the issues the administration is recommending to address in this update, most of which were included in the draft changes considered during the gut process last year. However, there are several staff recommended new items, including policies addressing VMT, otherwise known as vehicle miles traveled, complete streets, any post-COVID university operational needs required by the university, as well as design guidelines for the campus. The administration asked Hewlett to provide feedback of the administration's proposed scope of work. Next slide. The administration plans to conduct extensive community outreach with both surrounding jurisdictions as well as stakeholder groups, environmental, neighborhood, student, and union organizations as well. Community engagement will include the creation of a website for the update that will serve to provide information and receive input. Community outreach notifications will include mailings, newspaper noticings, social postings, and email lists. In accordance with the health order, the department will use online tools to the maximum extent possible, including webinars and video, and explore methods to provide computer access to anyone who doesn't have access to the internet. Back at the end of May, the administration did meet with Stanford's reps to provide an overview of the proposed process and updates, and the department and the administration will continue to engage with Stanford, incorporating regular meetings throughout the update process to ensure they have meaningful input into this important process.
Thank you. Let's take a break right there. And Peggy, let's go to our speaker, Supervisor
It's expected to be an
Simidian.
18 to 24-month project.
Supervisor Simidian, would you like to ask your questions before or after the speakers?
After, please. I agree with you, but let's make sure our speakers get heard, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Peggy, if you can, what is our speaker total at now?
4, 5, 6. Give me a second, and we are at 8.
Okay. Let's give each of the speakers 90 seconds at this time. Are you able to do that, Peggy?
Yes, we can.
Okay, let's do that with the understanding that we're probably going to get some more speakers joining in.
Our first speaker is Melissa Patton Caswell. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you. This is Melissa Caswell. I'm a board member in Palo Alto Unified School District. Thank you, Chairman Wasserman, Supervisor Simidian, and all of the committee members. I'm speaking as a board member for Palo Alto Unified. We support the county staff proposal to move the location of the designated future school site to the west side of campus, near where any proposed housing may be built. Thank you. When we need an additional school, it's going to make sense to have it in a place where our students live. Right now, we have 250 kids enrolled from Stanford West, which is right on the west side of campus. And with the proposal for additional housing, if we have a future need for a school site, that's likely where we will need it. Second, I would like to ask staff to insert PAUSD's need for full mitigation for new tax-exempt housing in that area. I request that any new tax-exempt housing, rental housing, come with additional operational payments to PAUSD or PI based on the number of Stanford students residing in the tax-exempt Stanford-owned rental properties. And then finally, I personally, and we haven't taken a position as a board, but I personally support the county staff proposal to conduct a childcare study and incorporate appropriate policies. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. I wonder if we could ask Ms. Caswell if on the two items where there was apparently board direction and she was speaking for the district, if we could be sure to get those positions in writing submitted to the staff so that they become part of the record and can be used and responded to in that fashion. I don't know if Ms. Caswell's in a position to respond, but if we could make that request formally and then ask staff to follow up, I think that would be wise. Okay?
I will make that request formally. We have a meeting tomorrow.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Nancy Kropp. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking. Nancy?
All right, let's move on to the next one and come back.
Okay. Our next speaker is Forrest I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Just to make it clear, I'm on my time off because I am a county employee as well as a granite research assistant. So over the past 6 years, Stanford has raised dependent health insurance rates by 80%. The increases in dependent healthcare costs far exceed increases in our stipends. Some graduate students with children are paying over a third of their incomes to keep the children insured. Stanford has suggested that graduate students with dependent children or dependent spouses make use of public health care plans like Medi-Cal or CalCares. But with the Supreme Court's decision to uphold the Trump administration's wealth test, use of public assistance is dangerous for many non-citizens. Use of Medi-Cal or covered California, even for one's U.S.-born child, could result in a student being labeled public charge and not allowed to return to the U.S. if they leave. Many of our non-citizen colleagues do not feel safe using this option. Stanford is one of the most resource-rich institutions in the world. Forcing students onto public assistance because the rates of dependent health insurance are unaffordable places an unfair burden of public resources that could be used to support other community members if needed. Having access to data on how many undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral students have dependent children and spouses, how many dependent children they are, and whether they have access to health care for their children and spouses through a spousal employer are critical points of information to help us assess the cost for Stanford to provide more affordable health care to all dependent children and spouses in the Stanford student community. A municipal services study that assesses how many student dependents are uninsured or underinsured would help determine the impact that the health needs of this community has on Santa Clara County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Nancy Kropp. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Yeah, hi, this is Nancy. Can you hear me? Yeah, hi, this is Nancy Kropp. I'm a parent in the Palo Alto School District, and I'm speaking on behalf of the staff recommendation to move the school site location closer to where housing will be built and to conduct the childcare study. Both of those points were advocated by the Palo Alto PTA Council, representing all 17 schools in the school district. So both of those recommendations are consistent with the recommendations and wishes of the Palo Alto PTA Council. And the third point is that under construction of housing, I second the point of our school board member that this section needs to include that to the extent Stanford develops new tax-exempt rental housing, that Stanford makes annual payments to the district or PI. And I'd just like to remind staff that the basis for including that insertion is the Santa Clara County zoning ordinance, that the county must find a project will not adversely impact the public health, safety, and welfare. And when you add more students without more funding, that adversely impacts our students' welfare. They will receive a lower quality public education if we have to cut programs and staff, and it'll also impact their health if we have to cut physical and emotional health programs. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Anna Toledano. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Great, thank you. County Supervisors, several of us are here today, including Forrest, who already spoke, to speak as members of the Stanford Solidarity Network, a group of graduate students who represent the interests of Stanford's graduate student population and who stand in solidarity with postdoctoral students and campus workers. We would first like to thank you for not only consistently listening to graduate student concerns, but taking action. We recognize that the graduate student housing affordability study, the childcare study, and the municipal services study have in part come out of extensive communication with the Solidarity Network during the general use permit or GUP process. While these studies were first unable to move forward due to the withdrawal of the GUP, we are pleased that these studies can now be carried out as the concerns that these studies would address exceed the particularities of the GUP application. We will be recommending a number of specificities that we believe the county should include in the studies mentioned. For the graduate housing study, we wish to emphasize the importance of using the federal definition of affordable housing at 30% of income. In the childcare study, we wish to emphasize that childcare needs not only concern the graduate and postdoctoral student populations, but campus workers as well. The lack of certain services on campus requires that students turn to government programs, which causes a drain on public funds. Today, Solidarity Network members will be giving more detailed comments on all of these issues, save domestic violence, which is an important topic that we intend to include within our official written submission to the county. We thank you again for your time and work, and we look forward to working together with the county on these studies going forward.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Amelia Group. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi there, my name is Amelia. I'm a graduate student at Stanford University, and I'm also a member of the Stanford Solidarity Network. I'd like to note that housing affordability remains a pressing issue for most graduate students at Stanford. For the upcoming school year, only 9% of graduate housing will be available at below the Department of Housing and Urban Development's affordability rate of 30% of income. Only 17% of available beds are below 35% of income. The high cost of rent, in addition to health insurance and other monthly expenses, leads to financial instability, which in turn has exacerbated problems of mental health, food insecurity, and homelessness within the Stanford graduate student population. We recommend that the Graduate Student Affordable Housing Study gather data on the income levels of all salaried and stipend earning graduate students, disaggregated across departments, schools, gender, and race, and rent levels of all Stanford's graduate housing. The study should also include calculations of affordability based on the HUD's definition of 30% of income levels, using both the minimum Stanford graduate student stipend to test the affordability of housing for all students and the actual stipend of graduate students, disaggregated as well, in order to analyze disparities across the graduate student population. We also recommend an assessment of the changes in rates over time, comparing minimum salary increases by the university with the yearly increases in rent rates.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tim Mackenzie. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak. My name's Tim Mackenzie. I'm here as a representative of SURPASS, the Stanford University Postdoctoral Association. We stand in solidarity with the Stanford Solidarity Network and want to express our support for their requests, and also to ask that postdocs during this process are specifically included. There are over 2,300 postdocs on Stanford's campus, and despite holding advanced degrees and working for one of the wealthiest institutions in the world, postdocs face serious financial struggles that externalize costs onto the county and act as a drain on county resources. As an example, a recent internal Stanford survey showed that nearly 10% of postdocs, more than 200 people and their families, suffer from food insecurity and rely on the Second Harvest Food Bank that is on Stanford's campus. With regards to housing, postdocs are only recently getting access to any affordable housing, so Stanford is bringing more postdocs into the campus and contributing to the housing process and the housing crisis. And we ask that the municipal services study include postdocs to the greatest extent possible. And lastly, the childcare service study, that is something that intimately impacts postdocs. And we ask that not just that in looking at demand, it's not sufficient to look at wait lists, but to look at changes in health.
Next speaker. Peggy, are you there? I think you're on mute, Peggy.
Hi, apologies. And I gave my little speech too. Thank you. Jen Hope, you have been unmuted. You'll have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
My name is Jen Hope, and I am a grad student at Stanford University, also with the Stanford Solidarity Network. I want to note that graduate and postdoctoral students have identified the need for affordable quality childcare as one of the most urgent issues facing students with families, but there's currently little information about the scope of this need. Most grad student stipends place a single student just above Santa Clara County's limit for extremely low-income housing. They place a student with 3 dependents at approximately 33% below the extremely low limit. Furthermore, while Stanford has several childcare facilities on campus, students with families are often placed on waiting lists for up to 18 months. If they're able to secure childcare on campus, the costs are often unaffordable, at times over $40,000 a year. Many graduate and postdoctoral students are thus forced to rely on county resources to meet their childcare needs. A study of the childcare needs of graduate and postdoctoral students is urgently needed to collect the following data points. A, how many graduate and postdoctoral students have children? B, how many childcare spaces are needed by graduate and postdocs? C, how many grad students and postdocs can afford to pay for childcare from their household incomes? We suspect that childcare needs are especially pressing for single students, but we don't know how many students are paying for childcare from single or dual incomes. We also wish to state that Santa Clara County should conduct an assessment of the childcare needs of Stanford campus workers. Like many students, campus workers do not receive adequate income to afford the cost of childcare in Santa Clara County. The county should assess whether Stanford is providing adequate, affordable childcare for all of these communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Grace Huckins. I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for giving us the chance to speak. I'm a doctoral student at Stanford, here with Stanford Solidarity Network, and I just want to highlight to the county how crucial it is that the mental health of students and postdocs be interrogated during this municipal services study. The student and postdoc population is in the midst of a mental health crisis. Recent studies have demonstrated that around 40% of graduate students suffer from moderate to severe depression and/or anxiety. While universities are ignorant of this crisis, Stanford does not provide adequate on-campus resources for students and postdocs to address their mental health concerns. Both CAPS for students and SHC for postdocs only offer short-term care, which is completely inadequate for these major concerns compared to long-term therapy. And when folks want long-term therapy, Stanford instructs them to seek it in the local community. However, this is almost impossible for students and postdocs in the Bay Area, where few therapists accept insurance and out-of-network costs are astronomical. And because of the enormous demand for students and postdocs from Stanford, it's very, very difficult to find anyone who takes Stanford insurance. And so Stanford students who are referred out to the community often undergo a long, painful process of searching for a therapist and ultimately never receive treatment for their major mental health concerns. The conditions of approval for the general use permit already indicate that the municipal services study should interrogate the state of mental health services provided by Stanford. It is clear that those mental health services are inadequate to meet the needs of Stanford students and postdocs. Like Santa Clara County, Stanford has a responsibility to provide mental health services to its residents who could not otherwise afford them.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Caleb Zerger. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, I'm Caleb Zerger. I'm also here with the Stanford Solidarity Network, and we would like to recommend that the municipal services study also address food insecurity at Stanford and the material resources needed to address it. So recently conducted studies have shown a very troubling prevalence of food insecurity on college campuses across the nation. The University of California estimates 40% of undergraduates and 25% of graduate students experience low or very low food security, and a similar trend is seen at peer private institutions. It is very unlikely that Stanford is an exception given the high cost of living in the area. Studies of food insecurity among students nationwide find food insecurity correlates with lower grades, lower graduation rates, and poor mental health. It particularly impacts students of color, LGBT students, and first-generation college students, especially those from foster homes. There is also a clear need for further assistance for international students or students with dependents. It is likely that the lack of food security among Stanford students is placing additional strain on county and state resources. It's unclear how many Stanford students use CalFresh benefits, and a study of food insecurity should investigate this. Monthly on-campus food pantry already draws over 200 students, and it is likely that other off-campus food bank or food assistance services are utilized by students as well. This will put a strain on grant money from the county, such as the mini grants given to nonprofits for food distribution earlier this year. Stanford should not be placing an undue financial burden on the county or state by failing to provide food security for its student body. We recommend a study to assess the prevalence of food insecurity, the burden on municipal and charitable services, and the necessary steps to ensure food security.
Peggy, how many?
Our final speaker.
I was just going to ask. Thank you.
Our final speaker is Olivia Fu. One additional hand did just raise, but Olivia, I'm unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you'll have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, my name is Olivia Fu. I'm a Stanford student with Scope 2035. First, I just want to say that Scope supports all of the points that SSN has made today. And I would also like to bring up the point on how reminding everyone on Stanford has historically been an irresponsible neighbor, and that this has really come to light even more during this pandemic. They have resisted and refused to pay their low-wage workforce and have expressed that there will be significant cuts in the coming budget years. We know from past actions that these cuts will affect their workers and that they will be hesitant to provide any additional benefits for the rest of the community other than what they have to provide. If there's no strong community plan, then Stanford will not step up or go above the bare minimum required to mitigate their impacts. Scope 2035 is putting together a list for what we want to see in the community plan, and we'll get that to you soon and look forward to working with you all during this process. Thank you.
And our final speaker is Shawnee Kleinhaus. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute and you will have 90 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking. Shawnee? She does not appear to be responding. And that would be our final speaker.
All right. Thank you, Peggy. And Supervisor Simitian, we've got 9 minutes till we have to break for the press conference. Do you have some questions you want to ask now, or we can have Jeff continue his presentation?
Whatever your pleasure, Mr. Chairman. I could start in with some questions and/or requests and take care of 2 or 3 or 4 before we get to the break, and then just pick it up when the break is over. What's your pleasure? Does that work for you?
That sounds good. Yep, I did have a promise to County Council and the clerk that we would stop at 10:50, so you're on.
All right, thank you. And I have scribbled notes everywhere, as well as some that I pulled together prior to the meeting, so forgive me if I am darting around a little bit. I think first I would just say thanks to the staff. I think for the most part, they have accurately captured the intent of the referral by the board, which Supervisor Chavez and I introduced, and which the board was kind enough to approve in a 5-0 vote. One question I wanted to ask, because there was mention of this in the staff report, as part of the withdrawn GUP process, the university itself had submitted some proposed community amendments. And I would describe most of them in my recollection as being largely housekeeping matters, but is it staff's intent? I don't have an opinion about them. I'm certainly not supporting or opposing any of them today, but I just wanted to ask, does staff anticipate reviewing the university proposed amendments to the community plan for possible action by our board? Let me stop there with the question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
If I may, through
yes.
the chair, yes, Supervisor Simitian, we do anticipate reviewing proposed changes from Stanford.
Thank you, and I look forward to, I just wanted to make sure that was the case, because I do think we should take a look at those proposals as well. I did want to sunshine that possibility so folks would have them on their list of things to be thinking about. Let me ask just another somewhat technical but important question, and I don't know if this who this goes to, so either Ms. Onchano or Mr. Bradley, but I noticed in the chart talking about traffic and daily trips and trying to provide a little greater precision about that, it does specifically mention that there would be an add-in for non-peak and total daily trips. But I didn't see it. If it's there, forgive me, specific direction or clarity about the fact that it would involve both commute and non-commute direction. That was a issue that the environmental impact report highlighted, I thought, as fairly significant, Mr. Chairman, meaning that we used to think, well, we just have to worry about the commute direction, and now there's no such thing as just one commute direction. There's the so-called reverse commute as well. So let me just clear with either Ms. Onchano or Mr. Bradley or whoever that is the expectation, and maybe going forward we could be specific about that if that's the case.
Okay. Please go ahead. Jacqueline, you're on mute.
Mr. Bradley, if you would respond.
Sure, Jeff Bradley with M Group. I would see including that to be consistent with the most recent work done as part of the GUP.
Good, appreciate that. Let me just ask a question about what had been anticipated to be the El Camino frontage plan as part of GUP, had that process been brought to a conclusion, and how it does or does not relate to the community plan. I ask in part because, not surprisingly, over the years, I think we've learned that the surrounding communities are more sensitive to development along the periphery of the campus because it's visible. And that was one of the things that folks were looking forward to, I think, with the frontage plan. Are those issues addressed in some way in the community plan? I'm thinking of viewshed issues or adjacency issues, but again, let me go to either Ms. Unshano or Mr. Bradley, whoever staff thinks is the more appropriate responder.
Thank you. Jacqueline or Jeff, unmute. Yep.
Mr. Bradley, would you go ahead and respond to that, please?
Sure, thank you. So I'm having some unusual technical audio problems I don't usually have.
No worries.
But the short answer is that we see that issue as falling under the umbrella of the topic of design guidelines for the campus. The El Camino Real Frontage Plan is essentially a design guideline document for a small portion of the campus, and the policy direction we'd like to explore is the feasibility and the advisability of design guidelines that would cover the entire campus.
Got it. So if I understand the hierarchy here of planning documents and process, the frontage plan is part of the design guidelines, which is potentially, and that's just all it is at this point, potentially part of the policy direction that could be provided by the community plan with respect to any or all of the campus. Did I get that right?
Correct.
Okay. Looking forward to seeing how that plays out. Let me just ask, there is passing reference to the 1985 tri-party agreement in the document, but it was a very specific and important part of the direction in the referral from Supervisor Chavez and myself. How does the staff anticipate that the that the tri-party agreement will be folded into this process?
Jeff, would you please respond to that? Can you
And
hear?
Mr. Chairman, before Mr. Bradley goes, I'm looking at the clock.
Yeah.
That's not a small question, so perhaps what you'd like to do is go ahead and take the break at this time. I want to respect the time commitments that have been made to others.
Thank you.
And let staff have a little time to think that one through.
That's exactly what we'll do. We'll resume then. I do want to say to Peggy and Dave, clerk members, our intention is to everyone resume at 11:15. James says they're going to start at 11, should be done by 11:15. So I'll look to get back on at that time, and everybody else that's wants to participate, that's expected to participate, please expect to be back on at 11:15. We may have to wait a few minutes more. I don't know if the press conference will go longer or not, neither does James, but let's plan on resuming at 11:15. Any other questions from anyone?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're okay with that, Supervisor?
Absolutely. Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
And Dave and Peggy, anything?
Yes, and I would suggest that people who have already joined the meeting to turn their cameras off and mute, but not disconnect from the meeting, and then try to reconnect, because that would delay starting up again.
Wonderful. And I'd like to start up again at 11:15. And if we get on, the press conference is still going, then we'll simply wait. Thank you very much.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
Thank you. And Supervisors Committee, and I texted both Supervisors Cortese and Ellenberg to let them know that you and I were currently in a Zoom Hewlett meeting. So that was done. Please, let's resume. Supervisor Committee, you were in the process of asking a question of Jeff.
And I think,
I apologize. Following the recess, can we do a very quick roll call?
Yes.
Vice Chairperson Samitian.
Present.
And Chairperson Wasserman.
Here.
Thank you.
Supervisor.
Thank you. I think actually we were just about to hear from Mr. Bradley, if I remember correctly, on the issue of the 1985 Land Use Policy Agreement, which I had raised, and they're thinking about the extent to which that would be part of the effort going forward over the next 18 to 24 months.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mr. Bradley.
Thank you. Jeff Bradley with M Group, Project Manager. The staff and the administration sees the land use agreement as a foundational document for the relationship between the county and Stanford and Palo Alto. And as because of that, we see this work as really fitting into and implementing the land use agreement in terms of Stanford providing municipal services in exchange for its ability to develop over time within the county and not being annexed into a adjacent city, such as Palo Alto. Having said that, we would like to do the municipal studies, the 3 specialized studies, and depending on the outcome of that, that might be a more clear picture of whether the land use agreement itself would need to be updated at all.
Well, I will thank you for that. I will just say, Mr. Chairman, and I'm looking to both the consultant, but also to Ms. Anshano as our planning director. And I've got the referral right here from February. The recommended action, which was approved unanimously by the board, very specifically talks about moving forward with items related to implementation or update of the Stanford Community Plan and the 1985 Land Use Agreement. So I think it's very clear, and the board action clearly directs that we consider whether there is action needed to implement, and I think that goes largely to the study work that Mr. Bradley has just described, but also to update the 1985 Land Use Agreement. And I say this because, you know, staff has made the point, and it's well taken, that the general plan and the Stanford Community Plan as part of our general plan is now 20 years old. That being said, the Land Use Policy Agreement, the tri-party agreement, is 35 years old and has not, to my knowledge, been the subject of any significant discussion in the last 25 years. I know Ms. Gallegos has been with the county during the 12 years that I was absent in the state legislature, but it certainly wasn't subject to any great discussion in the late 90s when we did the prior GUP, and it certainly wasn't subject to any great discussion in the last 7.5 years that I've been back on the board. Ms. Gallegos, did I miss anything through the chair during those 12 years that where there was some significant discussion of the 1985 Tri-Party Land Use Policy Agreement?
So you did not, and I want to underscore that, in fact, we are, as part of this work, will be reviewing that agreement to ascertain whether and what form any update would occur that we would recommend to the board. And we did write one sentence, so we didn't write a lot, but it is our intent. I wanted to make sure that was on the record.
No, thank you. I appreciate getting that into the record, because the tri-party agreement, which I also have handy, is sort of very specific about certain expectations and understandings which may or may not still be accurate 35 years later. And certainly the effort, Mr. Chairman, that staff is undertaking in terms of municipal services is essential in understanding whether or not the commitment to provide those services, which is contained in the document, whether that commitment is in fact being met. But there's a larger question here, and I know it's a daunting and scary one in many respects, but the question is it time to renegotiate the 1985 agreement? Is it time to withdraw from the 1985 agreement? Is it time to revisit the question of annexation? Because the document specifically acknowledges that the university's status as a unincorporated community is unique in our county, and so I just think that's we shouldn't just rush right by that and act as if that's a given. So I'm hoping for that one sentence to be perhaps elongated and given a little more consideration as we go forward, because working on the foundation that things have changed. So thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. Some other items, some of these are relatively brisk and administrative. Some of them are a little more thought-provoking. I will just say, looking at the referral, and staff knows that this is a continuing conversation with me in my office, but there's reference to working with the community resource group, and then reference to the fact that it, meaning the community resource group, includes representatives from various stakeholder groups. Let me just ask, unless staff, has a well-formed opinion to the contrary, that we refer to these folks as participants. And Mr. Chairman, you and I have had this conversation in committee previously. I think once we go down the path of people thinking of themselves as representatives of a particular point of view, then things get a little challenging in terms of people's expectations about what their role is, what the reaction will be to their proffering a thought, how the people start to jockey a little more aggressively about making sure that they're represented in the group. The community resource group was designed to be a community resource group, just that, a resource group, a body that could be used to sit and toss ideas out, get some feedback, understand what the mix of community views was. But just as we're sort of having the same conversation in terms of the San Juan neighborhood these days, I'll just ask staff to be sensitive to that going forward as we talk about and with the community resource group. Let me see what else we have here. I do think it should just be said out loud, Mr. Chairman, that while staff has given us, I think, a very good and well prepared list of areas where activity might take place in terms of an update to the community plan, that we acknowledge that the staff will have flexibility going forward to come back to us with a list that looks somewhat different. It may have additional items. Some of these items might fall off, but I just I don't want anyone, and certainly not the public, to think, well, this is the list and there's no way it could change over time. Clearly it could. That's why there's a 18-month to 2-year process involved. Couple of just quick observations, and I'm going to be quick about them, Mr. Chairman, just because of time, but I don't want that to diminish their importance. I do think one of the things that's changed pretty significantly over the last 20 years is the way we think about sustainability, and it's a term that I think is sort of off a little casually sometimes, and we used to think of sustainability as sort of a separate thing over here, and I think all in intervening years come to think of sustainability as something that ought to be interwoven. Forgive my virtual PowerPoint here. Sustainability that ought to be interwoven with all of these other issues. So I would ask the staff and the consulting team to keep the sort of notion of sustainability top of mind and think about how they can weave that through the work. Related to that, and the question I asked earlier about traffic and daily trips, are alternative forms of transportation, and that's always a big issue at the on the university lands that are covered by the Stanford Community Plan. So I think the question I would ask, and I want to be very specific about it, is, are there policies that can be embedded in the plan that incentivize reduced reliance on traditional single occupancy vehicles? I think that's the way I would tee that one up. I think to the extent that it can be addressed in a general plan and a community plan, the issue of large events, which also came up during the GUP process, is one that should be given some thought. You know, the university lands serve everything from the function of an individual student who is pursuing her or his degree to being the venue for extraordinarily large events. And so I just, and then some what I'll call medium large events that sometimes fall through the cracks. So if we can be thinking about policies that are mindful of that, I do think that the staff did a nice job of laying out the engagement of the community resource group, but I think it's important for staff to gather input from beyond the community resource group. And I saw the list of various other entities and thought that was very helpful and encouraging. I should just say that there are a few other groups that I want to mention, and I'll do that publicly now in the record, and then ask my staff to share them with you all in writing. But for the school districts, for example, there are actually 3 other school districts that serve Menlo Park that are not yet on the list to my knowledge. And those would be the Ravenswood City School District, the Redwood City School District, and the Sequoia Union High School District. And so I would just ask that they all get pulled in. I see that there is a reference to Californians advocating responsible rail design, but it is I think there's a typo there, so it's not rain design, it's rail design. Committee for Green Foothills now goes by Green Foothills. They've rebranded, as does everybody apparently, and we probably want to make that correction. On a more substantive level, I'd like to ask that the Stanford campus residential leaseholders is referenced as well, and in terms of community groups, I want to make sure that Surpass, who we heard from earlier, is part of this group as well. And I think, can't see if we've added Palo Alto, Stanford Heritage, but they should be in the mix as well. And then I did just want to say I appreciated the comments from speakers earlier about the need for food insecurity, mental health, and domestic violence issues. And I would just say beyond domestic violence, we know that sexual assault is a challenge, frankly, in this setting, and we'll want to make sure that it gets the attention it requires and deserves in the process. Let me see what else I've got, if anything. I don't see the town of Atherton on the list of jurisdictions. They are proximate, relatively small, obviously, and did not weigh in particularly heavily in recent years, but from time to time they did, and I think we probably would be wise, and it would certainly be appropriate to include them as well. And then, hang on, Mr. Chairman, I've scribbled my notes in 3 different places, so I think that covers it. I really, the one area where I think that there's just sort of a big looming set of issues out there is around the annexation issue and the tri-party agreement. The rest of it is all important, of course, but you know, things where I think we can just make sure that we're diligent and get the work done. If there are questions from staff or comments from staff on any of that, Mr. Chairman, I would be pleased if you could accommodate them. And I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you. If there are any questions, otherwise, Jacqueline and Jeff, we each got the report, the PowerPoint, and everything else in the last several days. And I would just want the item is simply to receive a report. And you've received all that from Supervisors Committee, and I saw you both taking notes. And he's also said his staff will be forwarding that to you so that it's clear. Are there any comments, responses to what Supervisors Committee and said that you wish to make at this time? Either one of you muting or unmuting?
And Mr. Chairman, particularly, and I know staff will understand this, if there's a problem or there's, pushback, which I understand and respect, I would really like to hear it now so that we don't have a misunderstanding going forward. That's part of what I'm hoping to surface, I think.
Jeff, Jacqueline? I don't have any questions, Chairperson.
Nor do I, Supervisor, Chair Wasserman. Thank you.
Okay, so you understood the direction and the information and everything else that was given.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yes. And again, it's a received report. I, just for the record, agree with what Supervisor Simitian has said. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you need a formal motion on the record, I'm happy to move the approval of the recommended action, which is to receive the report and to provide direction as indicated.
I think because of the providing directions indicated, we should have a vote. So Peggy, if you'll please do a roll call vote.
Vice Chairperson Simitian.
Aye.
Chairperson Wasserman.
Aye. Now, Supervisor Simitian, if it's all right with you, we've got 5, 6, and 9 to go. 6 is an action item. So Jacqueline, I'm going to go back to you, but would ask you to realize that we received the information, the report. Supervisor Simitian and I each do our work. And I, for one, am looking forward. Good. Yeah, I've got a different note on that. So please, Jacqueline, whatever it is you or your staff member wishes to say. Supervisor Simitian, I'd like to jump to number 6 because it's action. 5 is simply to receive a report, if that's all right with you.
I am with you on that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we can be brief, Supervisor Wasserman, relative to the planning clearance. We have 2 staff available. If the committee so desires a presentation, Joanna Wilk, one of our associate planners, and one of our planning managers, Lisa McKyle, who also functions as our zoning administrator.
I certainly do not. What I will say is I'm glad to hear that you'll be checking with our auditor controller as far as confirmation of the hourly charge that we need to charge residents in this new proposed item. I had some questions about it, but Christopher informed me that you'll be checking with the auditor to double check figures. Supervisor Simitian, do you have anything you wish to add?
If this is the moment, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to move approval of the recommended action as contained in our published agenda.
Thank you.
Excuse me, members of the committee, this is Elizabeth Bianca. I request that I'm sitting in today for Assistant County Counsel Steve Mitra, that public comment be provided on item number 6, and then also if you have item number 5 as well.
Yes, we will be going back to 5.
Okay. Okay.
For item 6, Peggy, do we have anybody wishing to make public comment?
We have no speakers.
Okay, seeing no speakers, we have a motion from Supervisor Simitian, which I'll second. Peggy, roll call vote, please.
Vice Chairperson Simitian.
Simitian, aye.
Chairperson Wasserman.
Aye. And for the record, that was to receive, but more importantly, to forward to the Board of Supervisors. Supervisor, that was our approval of staff's recommendations, correct?
That is correct. And the motion goes with a favorable recommendation. That was my intent, Mr. Chairman. Forgive me.
Yes, I join with you. So that's unanimous. Thank you. We now go back to item number 5. Peggy, do we have any members of the public that wish to speak on 5?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Key, are you there?
Key is not here, but this is Hillary Baroga from the Office of Supportive Housing Supervisor.
Hello, Hillary. This is a receive report only. Is there anything that you wish to add to the half-dozen-page report that Supervisor Simitian and I received previously?
No, I'm just here to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you. Supervisor Simitian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess just one question, and there's a sort of I think it's called the Housing Problem Solving Program, which struck me as an intriguing idea. And my question is it included in the plan for next year? I'm thinking about the budget constraints that we're all aware of, and just trying to get a sense for whether that's something that is planned for next year, or if not, would it be possible to at least pilot at a smaller scale, or is there even an argument that it would save money? So let me just ask that question.
Thank you. Hillary?
Yes, we are piloting it now with the Intimate Partner Violence Housing Funds. So there's a small pilot happening through Aki, and it is in our ideal plan with some state housing and homeless assistance program funds, but so long as we don't need to redirect those funds to cover costs related to COVID-19 work.
Thank you. I'll ask my office to stay in touch and keep an eye on it, because I do think there's I think the report does a nice job of sort of making the case and helping with the understanding of the fact that there are folks who may not be at this level of need, but who have a slightly different level of need where we could step in before things get really dire to good effect. So I'll let it go at that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Hillary, and if you'll also pass on to Key, I know we've got this COVID going on that's kind of wreaking havoc with the plans that we had and the resources and the housing and getting people into the hotels and motels and getting them the services and hoping they can work their way out, and hotel vouchers and everything else. So if you'll please keep us informed whenever appropriate, certainly at this committee. The H stands for housing. And if you'll keep us informed, please, of what's going on. My particular interest is how your efforts and Key's efforts and the department's efforts are affected given the COVID shelter in place and the housing and the process and pre-vaccine and everything else going forward. I would certainly appreciate periodic updates from you.
Will do, sir.
Thank you. And Supervisor Simitian, that was simply a received report, which we don't need a motion for, and we did not have any public speakers for it. So without objection, I'm going to turn now to Jasmeet Sharma, our Director of Sustainability, as we have item 9 left to go that we pulled off the consent earlier. Jasmeet.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor Wasserman. I am going to power through the presentation. I'm going to do it in like fast forward motion. I think some things were laid out in the ledge files. I'm probably going to make some decisions on which slides I'll skip through and which ones I'll pause on, so that it'll give us some time if you have some feedback or comments or questions at the end as well.
Thank you.
And if you'll give me just a few seconds, I'm going to share my screen. Just trying to hit it in presentation mode. Okay, can you see the presentation now?
Yes, I see your PowerPoint.
Great, thank you so much. So our purpose really, we're excited to present to the committee the draft sustainability master plan. I know it's been in the works for a couple of years, so really wanted to bring this to the committee and share some of the key highlights, but also solicit any comments or feedback that you might have for us. I'll skip through the purpose. What I want to highlight here is really the SMP tries to, or it presents a unified vision and the strategic approach for us to address sustainability holistically across many of our county programs and our efforts as well. And really what the SMP really just tries to do is build on decades of work and leadership by the county to promote sustainability and environmental stewardship locally, regionally, and nationally as well. And again, the goal is to avoid duplication of resources, leverage existing resources as well, but really start to have that close coordination and collaboration across our departments and across many of the different topics and issues as well. What I wanted to call out in this slide is really that the SMP does take a kind of a whole systems approach. Many of the topics you are seeing here are actually specific issues that are addressed in the SMP. We do this by integrating the 3 core elements of sustainability, which the board have also called out very early on, which is economy, environment, and social equity. And I think one thing that became very obvious to us in the last couple of months is that whether it's climate disruptions or global events like the pandemic that we're currently in, there are going to be greater and greater demands on healthcare, housing, safety net services in the future, and especially on our socially vulnerable communities as well. So really trying to weave sustainability and resilience through all our programs and services is going to be all the more critical now. This is just a quick flowchart to show you kind of where the process started in spring of 2018 when the board adopted the Sustainability Master Plan framework. We have had extensive meetings over the last nearly 2 years, some larger working group meetings, some one-on-one meetings, but this is just to show you kind of the different processes and the different meetings we've had to kind of bring us to where we are today to present the draft master plan to you. And this is just a listing of all the departments that have engaged so far. I did highlight 2 departments, the Office of Emergency Management and the Health and Hospital System, mainly because we have not been able to engage as deeply with them since January of this year for obvious reasons because of COVID. But I just wanted to highlight that there are some actions that are called in the SMP, which we still need to loop back with them for their feedback. And the SMP, again, quickly, it really has 3 key components to it, which is what we call the vision, the 4 priority areas, and then a management system, which also include the public-facing dashboard. So the board adopted this sustainability vision about a decade or so ago, and in our conversations with most of the departments that have engaged, and as we were trying to get a better understanding of what is this breadth of work that the county and the different county departments take on, we do propose a refined and an updated sustainability vision that speaks to the current social and environmental conditions that we're currently in, and also approaches it from a future aspiration standpoint. So the text I've highlighted in blue around climate pollution and for a global climate and making sure that everyone has equitable opportunities, that's some of the new content or text that's been added in. The vision is proposed to be achieved kind of having this concept of cross-cutting themes across the 4 priority areas, which is a commitment to equity, calling the need to be collaborative, also understanding that innovation, creative thinking, and piloting new tools and technologies will be critical, but also recognizing that empowering our county employees and our community members to be mindful sustainability practitioners will be just as important. And there are 4 priority areas, or you could think of them as 4 buckets that got identified in the Sustainability Master Plan around climate protection, natural resources, community health and well-being, and a just economy. And you'll see if this just gives a description of across the 4 priority areas, there are goals, there are about 30 strategies, and then targets that are identified for each strategy. This is really what we're going to be using. The targets and what we call the KPIs, the performance indicators, is what we'll use to measure and report on our progress. I did want to highlight that the environmental stewardship goals have been integrated into the SMP as well. And this slide is just showing you the different goals under which each of the environmental stewardship goals have been captured. The language for some of the ESGs have been updated. Again, this was based on feedback we got from the departments, and the reason for that was that some of the current market landscape has changed. There are new innovations or technological advancements that have happened, which warrants us being able to achieve more things as well. And the management system is just, I wanted to highlight, this will be kind of the public-facing aspect of the Sustainability Master Plan. And this is just a very early sketch that we're showing you, but really people can go in and actually explore the Sustainability Master Plan. Most of it is going to live online, and then they can click on the dashboard, which is the image on the right-hand side, where you can actually go and see what specific progress have we made on a target as well. And I'm just going to quickly move through these next 4 slides. This is just the 4 priority areas, and our intent here was to show you the types of topics or actions that are included. So again, climate protection and defense focuses on making sure we're meeting our carbon neutrality commitments that we've made, but also ensuring that we are taking action to respond to future shocks or stressors as well. and natural resources and environment. Really, there is a lot of work that's already happening here, and we call all of that out in the master plan. And really the emphasis is, let's continue to work on all the projects that we are already working on. There's the Valley Habitat Plan, there's the County Park Strategic Plan, there's the Agricultural Plan. So that's really the intent here, but also calling out some new challenges that are posed by climate change, and also how we address some of the historical disparities. Community health and well-being, again, recognizes that our health is impacted by economic and housing stability, healthcare access, and the built environment in which we live, because it determines our access to transportation systems, recreation, housing, and education. So really the actions in here aim to ensure that residents have access to that resilient healthcare, affordable housing, a social safety net as well, and also opportunities for learning, leadership as well, and engagement. And lastly, the prosperous and just economy is, again, recognizing that we do have a lot of work happening through our Office of Reentry Services and Office of Labor Standards and Enforcement as well. So we do call out all of those in the workforce development and the diverse job opportunities piece as well, but also include actions to promote learning and leadership among county employees to cultivate that culture of sustainability. And this is my last slide, which is just laying out the next steps, where we do need to identify some overarching equity goals and strategies. So we will be working with the the Division of Equity and Social Justice, and of course, finalizing the actions, the management system, the website, and the dashboard as well. And thank you. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Peggy, do we have any public comments on this item?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor, I've got a comment to make. I'm happy to defer to you.
Supervisor Wasserman, may I make a comment before
Yes,
Supervisors? I wanted to just quickly underscore, which I think is a very important point, is that Jasneet's the third sustainability director we've had in this last 10 years. And what I've said to each of them is that we are very blessed because we have, to the board member, a very strong commitment to sustainability in all of its permutations as described in the report. And I use that as a way to sell people on the job. But I wanted in particular point out with this Sustainability Master Plan that it actually goes back to 2015 and the work that Supervisor Samitian and Chavez were doing in Finance Committee. And so this arose specifically from their referral. I wanted to make sure to have that captured on the record. And with that, I will end my comments.
Thank you very much.
And Supervisor Wasserman, we do have someone who has raised their hand to speak if you wish to take it.
Thanks, Peggy, and that person has 90 seconds. Thank you.
Our speaker is Lucy Wicks. I'm unmuting you. You will have 90 seconds to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Lucy.
I just wanted to let you know that your video feed is not working, so this has nothing to do with the topic, but the video feed is not working on any other platform besides Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I don't know why her video feed didn't work. My video feed did. I hope other people's did as well. The 75-page report, Jasneet, that you put together, we appreciate that. I appreciate the expedited manner in which you went through the highlights. Rest assured, Supervisor Samitian and I and our respective aides also went through it. I want to say what I've noticed since you're being here is the way you've moved the ball. I really appreciate that. As Sylvia said, we are all supportive of the department and its goals. And I found that what you've brought forth are creative strategies that leverage existing partnerships. And I think that's very important. And I think obtaining our sustainability goals during the next year or so with what's going to easily be $250 million deficit is very, very important. Thank you. Supervisor Samitian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have a recommended action, which is not only to receive the report, but to forward it to the full board for discussion with a favorable recommendation.
Yes.
If you like, I'm happy to make that recommendation. I will withhold comments and questions, or make that motion rather, to support the recommended action. I'm happy to withhold questions and comments until the regular meeting of the board, given our scheduled today. So why don't I let it go at that? I will just note that the referral that's Ms. Gallegos noted from August of 2015 from Supervisor Chavez and myself specifically references the budgetary resources necessary to create the plan. So that does need to be part of the conversation at the full board. Thank you. Happy to move the approval of the recommended action.
Thank you, and I will second that as well. And Peggy, we don't have any other speakers, is that correct?
No, we don't. Get a very quick roll call vote. Vice Chairperson Simitian.
Simitian, aye.
And Chairperson Wasserman.
Wasserman, aye. Thank you very much, Jasneet. Nice job, and thank you all for being flexible and dealing with the time constraints. I received word that we were going to have that 20-30 minute interruption in the middle, just about an hour before our meeting started. So yes, I know that. Okay, thank you. So I really appreciate all of your indulgence. I think we got the work done. Supervisor Simitian mentioned questions he's got that he'll raise when this issue is agendized for the full board meeting. We also were able to receive all public comments for every single item that people wanted to speak on. Supervisor Simitian, anything else you wish to say?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And with that said, we'll adjourn this meeting to our next regularly scheduled meeting, August 20th. I, for one, hope it's in the board chambers, but one way or another, we will see you somewhere soon. Take care, everybody. Be safe.